Yeah, he's 95 today. Okay, we are hitting the point dealing with psychology, point number 14 in the 24 Theses. I guess we should remember that it really isn't my function here to demonstrate every part of this, but rather to explain how these principles are consistent with Thomistic thought, primarily. And here we begin with very basic principles, not immediately stated, but certainly critical to understanding any of this section on psychology, is the hylomorphic doctrine. And of course, remember, psychology means the science of the psyche, the science of the soul. Every time I tell somebody I'm teaching psychology, of course, I have to explain to them that I don't mean experimental psychology, but philosophical psychology, which immediately tells them that they haven't got a clue what I'm saying. But the first point, number 14, says, souls in their vegetative and sensitive orders cannot subsist by themselves, nor are they produced of themselves. Again, our function here is to try to understand and explain what they are saying. Rather, and to complete it, they are no more than principles, whereby the living thing exists and lives, and since they are wholly dependent upon matter, they are incidentally corrupted through the corruption of the composite. What on earth does all that mean?
Means my doggy doesn't go to heaven.
Yes, it does. As I told you once, I had a student, when I told her basically that, she started crying. And I was so moved by it, for a moment I retracted my statement and only gently reintroduced it much later on. I couldn't tell her that point blank. Even C.S. Lewis, you may recall, has in one of his works an explanation that when you get to heaven, if you want your dog to be there, it will be there. I don't know how far he went into whether it will really be the same dog or not. It is much like the existential problem that you have according to the Jehovah's Witnesses, where when you die, if you're among the elect, when you die, you're completely gone. But God will recreate you at a later point in time. Well, of course, from the standpoint of metaphysics, this is a doppelganger, but it's not really you. It's the same problem you have when in Star Trek, they're beaming people up or beaming people down. It sounds great, but the problem is what they're doing is not really beaming you up or down. They're decomposing your atomic structure in order to understand it perfectly so they can reassemble at the other end a you, supposedly, which is perfectly identical to you because they have the perfect blueprint of what you are. The problem is, from the standpoint of metaphysics and reason, it isn't you. It's a being, at best, that is perfectly identical to what you were when you entered the transporter. But the truth of the matter is, you died when you went through the transporter. That's what actually happens. Now, assuming you could produce at the other end a being with substantial unity. See? You'd actually have to have God create a new soul for that being that's being synthesized at the other end of the transporter. So anyway, if they offer you that kind of transportation, you might do well not to accept it. In fact, there was, I believe, I think it was an Outer Limits show once, where they actually were doing this to send somebody to a distant planet for 2 years and then bring them back, and somebody figured out what I was just saying, that it's not really the same person. And therefore, I know what it was. When they sent you out, part of the process was you had to dissolve the one that you were sending out. And somebody figured out that, they didn't want to die because they realized that's what had to happen for them to be transported, which was okay for a couple of years, but then the other one came back, and then you had two of them, and somebody had to go, so that was the story. But
You had to move the fly, too.
yes. But all these wonderful science fiction explanations of how these things are done, unfortunately, don't always pass metaphysical muster. They sound good, but don't be the first one to volunteer on any of these things. At any rate, what were we reading here? The souls in the vegetative and sensitive orders cannot subsist in themselves. We have to go back and remember, basically, this is hylomorphism. The alternative is atomism. The alternative is that there aren't things above the atomic level. And this is precisely why Aristotle and St. Thomas and I are hylomorphists, matter and form. If the moment you allow that there are beings above the atomic or subatomic level, you've got to have some principle of unity, some way to explain why they're really one and why they are the kind of thing that they are. And that's what we mean by form. That's where we get the understanding of the meaning of substantial form. And substantial form really would not exist in a purely atomic universe. So, form, though, and matter, at least as far as vegetative and sentient beings are concerned, these are not independent forms. They're forms that depend on matter for their existence. They depend on the composite of form and matter for their continued being. If you dissolve that composite, they cease to be. And there goes your pet dog. But what you do have in form, remember, is a principle of unity. When you're counting beings, you're counting forms. You're counting how many times are there really substantially unified entities. And they're substantially unified because they have a single principle of unity. And the principle of unity is the form. Absent that, they're not one thing. So you're going to have as many beings as you have substantial forms. And that's relevant when you start stacking up the powers as you move up towards man, who possesses nutritive, sentient, and intellective capabilities. Because then you get into the question, well, how many forms do you have? And it comes back to the point that you have as many beings as you have forms. So be careful about multiplying your forms. So matter and form are not things in themselves. They are principles. Principles from Latin princip means a starting point. And that's why your prince is the head of things. It's a starting point. But a starting point is not a thing. A form is not a thing. A form is not a substance. A matter is not a thing. A matter is not a substance. But matter and form together constitute substance. And the soul is just the name that we give to the substantial form of things that are alive. If they're not alive, we just call them forms. If they are alive, we call those forms souls. Aristotle doesn't even debate the question of whether there is a soul, because a soul is a principle of life. So living things, by definitions, have something that makes them different than non-living, and that's what we call the soul. The question wasn't whether there is a soul, but what is the nature of the soul? And of course, for the materialist, living things, logically, are not things. They're not substances. They're not beings in themselves. They don't always see that, of course. They don't always understand that. You'll find many times when you are discussing something with a materialist, many times scientists who are materialists, they really do not understand, how can I put it gently, what they're saying. They really do not understand the first principles they are presupposing. They don't understand that in order to do what they're doing, they're making all kinds of philosophical presuppositions that if you offer them to them, they'll often deny. And of course, this also is combined with a lot of notions about what things are, for example, causality, which are really untrue and lead to all kinds of misconceptions. We'll see this a little more clearly when we get over to the last few theses dealing with God. I intend to address a few of those questions there. So, if the substance of a living thing is dependent on the actual composition of form and matter, clearly when the thing dies, the form is no longer present, and it's got no place to go, no encore. So it is gone. And as gently as I can put it, especially for those who are hearing this on a recording, that means that when your pet dog passes away, it ceases to be entirely. But of course, as C.S. Lewis says, perhaps when you get into the next life, God will have it there for you. And we won't discuss the metaphysical entailment concerned therein.
That point was formulated differently by a Jesuit I read about on one occasion. If you're telling a little old lady was having this exact doubt that if you will not be happy in heaven without Fluffy, Fluffy will be there with you in heaven.
Right, absolutely. You'll be perfectly happy, and so will Fluffy.
But she will be happy without Fluffy. That's the Jesuitical twist there.
Yeah, well, in this life we are not given to understand all things. And there are things, if you did fully understand them, you couldn't survive. I mean, it's like, no man has seen God and lived. We're not up to it. So there are many things God understands, that we have to understand these things from our standpoint of our own human nature and not press ourselves too much. Number 15, on the other hand, the human soul subsists, that is, it has existence, of itself. When it can be infused into a sufficiently disposed subject, it is created by God. By its very nature, it is incorruptible and immortal. That lays down the general principles. Of course, this is possible precisely because the human soul engages in, or enables man to engage in activities that are utterly independent of matter. And remember, you know the nature of something by its activities. So the activities which we engage in of reasoning, judging, understanding, and willing are strictly immaterial activities, and the soul that is required in order to do that, therefore, has to be independent of matter because it operates independent of matter. Notice it says when it can be infused into a sufficiently disposed subject. Now, what is a sufficiently disposed subject? I wrote an article in Faith and Reason, which was published, I think, in 2008, dealing with this. It was entitled On the Philosophical Impossibility of Darwinian Naturalistic Evolution. And the key point of that is that when you talk about a sufficiently disposed subject, remember, matter and form have to fit each other. You don't have the form of a human being activating the matter of a snail, nor would you have the form of a snail activating the matter of a human being. There has to be a due proportion. And the extent to which that proportion must be perfect is determined by the activity of the form. The form, one of the things, remember, when you talk about form does a lot. Form explains why, and we're talking about substantial form. The form of the substance explains why the thing exists. as a horse, let's say. It explains why it is what it is, why it has hoarseness. It explains why it's alive. In other words, the form specifies and determines the matter to hoarseness, whatever that entails. And it's very important to realize that it's the form that determines the matter, not the matter that determines the form. Matter is potential. Matter's waiting to be specified, to be activated. In itself, it is radical indetermination. And because of that, it is the form that determines the nature of the being which comes to be when the form is present. And that means you never have a human nature until you have a human form. The radical spiritual character of the human soul is such that it alone can specify matter concretely and determinately to be the matter of a human being. And the point I was making in that article is that's the problem with evolution. Evolution says as the matter changes, randomly evolves and so forth, it gets disposed to new and higher forms. But the catch is, how can the old lower form account for the coming to be of the disposition of the matter that you have when you have the new and higher form? Because the matter is always disposed by the form it's got. So if you got a lower form, say the form of just an animal, that is not in itself capable of determining matter to be fit for activation by the human soul. So you can have an evolutionary process of adaptation and change and mutation, whatever you want, rearranging and redistributing the disposition of the matter in many different ways. But again, remember, even when you're dealing with an animal, it's distributed and redistributed according to what that animal form determines. It's not the form of a vegetable, it's a form of an animal. Without specifying which animal, because I don't want to get into the business about biological and philosophical species right now. But whatever it is what it is because it's determined by the substantial form of the animality it's got, hoarseness, let's say, if you want. But how do you make that transition to the next stage? How do you move up to the existentially superior state of being human? If the matter is always determined by the form and not the form by the matter, then how do you get the matter determined to be activated by the human form? No matter what you do with the form or matter, as long as you're dealing with an animal form, that matter is always disposed merely to the form of animality, whatever it happens to be. So, at the moment at which it becomes human, you've got to suddenly have present a human form, a human substantial form, which then radically transforms the matter. Radically, in a sense that one could even say it creates the human being at that moment. This, I would suggest, is a legitimate understanding of theistic evolution. In other words, however it is done, at the moment that the first human being appears, whether you do it from the slime of the earth or you do it from some pre-existent animal matter, whether at a point of conception or at the point of some kind of a mature individual, the act of transforming this matter into the human living substance is a creative act, because you are instantaneously changing the disposition of the matter in a way that it could never do it by itself. No evolutionary process by itself can do that, because the only thing that can so determine that matter is the human soul, and it's not there yet. It's only there when it is there. And when it is there, it then determines the matter to fit itself perfectly. So it's a radical transformation at that point. And that's why it is something that actually can only be done by God, because God must supply the spiritual soul that does this at that moment in time.
So how
Sister.
many matters are there? Like, it sounds like, what is matter? What, without form, okay, what is matter?
I understand your difficulty, sister, because I can't drag it out of my briefcase and say, here's the matter. You can't do that. In fact, I was dialoguing with your friend from Australia on this point, and he's trying to explain to his students how, as you go deeper and deeper into the lower states of matter, you're getting closer and closer to primary matter. The problem is, as I had to tell him, no matter how far you go, it's still determinate to some, even if you're dealing in quanta or things that are below that level, it's always determined by some form. So if that helps your students to understand, well and good, but it really doesn't address the issue. Matter is not in itself formed. It is potential to all forms. It is simply the ability of any material being to become any other material being when a proper form activates it.
But
That's
does
all.
it actually exist? Is there matter?
It actually exists only when form gives it existence. Forma.esse.
So is it just a name then?
No, it's not just a name. It is a real principle. But it's a principle that is only real when it's activated by form. Just as below man, the form is only real when it is individuated by matter. The form of the dog has the same problem as the matter of the dog. And that's why when you divide matter and form, the form ceases to be for the dog. Its matter ceases to be, but its matter then becomes actuated by a different form. But so I can understand. You want to imagine what matter is. Can't do it. You can understand it. Same as form. You can't really imagine form. You can imagine a horse.
So it's not material, it's not something you could hold?
No, it's not a, yeah, matter is not material, if you want to put it that way.
Okay.
Prime
Prime matter.
So then this would not be the argument that would be used to understand the problem of, say, test tube babies. That's not the matter we're talking about when it's on 15.
No, I don't think so. The problem is
I mean, is that a sufficiently disposed subject? That's the phrase.
right. Oh, the problem is that anything you can imagine is already a thing, and it's already got a form. So you're never going to imagine matter by itself. You can't do it.
Pile of matter.
But then
Yeah.
who decided that there would be such an element or a principle as matter? Where does that
It-
notion derive?
It comes from Aristotle solving the problem that was raised by Heraclitus and Parmenides.
To differentiate humans from the
No,
lesser?
Problem of change.
to explain how change is possible. Change is possible only because a material thing in one state can be changed into a material thing in a different state. So to explain how there is continuity between the before and the after, there must be something that stays the same, or at least remains in some way, and that's what we call matter. Otherwise, when you change an egg into a chicken, you'd have to annihilate the egg and create the chicken. There's continuity there. The principle of continuity is what we call matter.
So what you're saying is that the form and the matter are the same, one and the same almost, and that, like, for example, if I was to cut off my arm, I would lose both part of my form and part of my matter. Would that be correct?
Well, I hang up when you say they're one and the same, because the matter and form are really distinct principles. One is not the other. But the two cannot exist independently of one another. They really love each other.
One is the arm and the other is the armness.
And all your children would have 2 arms.
And I would never cut off my own arm, but I'm just saying.
I don't know, I was just reading on the Drudge Report about a couple of Russians who cut off their own ears because they were arm wrestling, and whoever lost had to cut off his ear. Well, for the first time they did it, one of them thought that he'd won and the other thought he didn't, so they did it again. And the other guy won, and they decided, well, it's a draw. Well, if it's a draw, neither one of us won, and the principle was if you didn't win, you had to cut off your ears, so they both cut off their ears. I think drink had something to do with this.
Would you repeat the thought that you had? You said matter is continuity, da-da-da.
Matter is what explains the continuity between the before and after in a world where things are physically changing. That's what we mean by the material universe. You gotta have.
When I thought about material universe, I thought about the mud and the, and
Well,
the
yeah.
walls and-
I mean, there's a lot of things that flow from this. The principle of matter explains how things can be extended in space, and their extension in space allows them to be divided. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we would do if we were doing the course in philosophical psychology. But the key insight here are the ones we're trying to get at right now. And I can understand your concern about how can you always want to pull out a drawer and find some matter down in it.
And you say, what's the matter?
But the form's got the same problem. That's what people don't realize. Form's got just the same problem. There is not the form of a chicken running around anywhere without its matter. Can't be. It is only when we come to the human condition that we find this curious reality where you can have a decomposition of the form and the matter, and yet something continues to exist, which is the substance of the human person. I didn't say man, because man, by definition, is a composite of form and matter, and when you die, you lose your matter. So what continues? You have personal immortality, but not human immortality.
That's more nice.
The class notes effectively say, when the human soul can be infused into a sufficiently disposed subject, it, the human soul, is created by God.
Right.
The commentaries here say, but since the reception of any form presupposes a convenient disposition in the receiving matter, the infusion of the human soul implies a sufficient disposition of the human body. Since a disposition is not likely to be found in a body recently formed, presumably human body, vegetative and sensible souls would precede the human soul. When do you get a human soul? When are you sufficiently disposed?
Okay, I don't know what your commentary is from, but that sounds
Well,
like it sounds like the theory of successive animation,
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh,
and that's what was held even in St. Thomas's time.
They reference Summa Theologica.
Understandably, yeah, sure. But, St. Thomas had the same problem John of St. Thomas had when he was trying to explain dragons, because all the scientists of his day knew that there were dragons. So,
Knew how they worked.
yeah, so he had to explain how they worked. I mean, you do what you can as a philosopher with what you're given by these scientists, but the scientists aren't always right. And it was thought, following Aristotle, that the form had to fit the matter. That was properly adjudged by Aristotle. But at the time of Aristotle, and even the time of St. Thomas, it was, as far as science was concerned, the matter at the point of conception didn't look like it could be disposed for reception of the human soul. So they came up with this theory that for the first 30 days, all you had was a vegetative soul. And then the next 30 days...
When The subject is sufficiently disposed.
Well, it didn't look like the subject was sufficiently disposed at conception. It didn't look like it was for the next 30 days. The first 30 days was vegetative, second 30 days was ascension soul, and the human soul didn't come to be till the end of the first 60 days after conception. And that, of course, did not make St. Thomas more readily accepting of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. But the Church did define it, following the insight that was proposed to it by, who was it? Scotus, Duns Scotus. And of course, St. Thomas would accept it because it was defined. Curiously enough, the science caught up with the dogma. And now we realize that the embryonic organism is specific, unique to the human species, that the sequence and ratios of the DNA macromolecule is specific only to the human subject, and therefore that it is appropriate to that form and no other form.
So the first cell is sufficiently disposed.
The first cell is specific to the human species and not to any other species. If you examine it at the genetic DNA level, it is uniquely human. It would not be appropriate to any animal. It just wouldn't. It is also that same organism which, left to unfold according to its own internal dynamism, becomes the adult human being with all the capabilities a human being has. So it doesn't turn into a rabbit or a carrot. So it is sufficiently disposed, but the actual determination of sufficient disposition is not something knowable to science. Natural science can tell us, yeah, this embryo belongs to the human species. It doesn't belong to an animal species. They can tell you that, but they can't tell you with absolute determination what it is in the matter that makes it able to be so disposed. They can tell by looking, say, at the DNA and the RNA that that's specific to the human species, but that's not necessarily all that it takes. Only God would know actually what it exactly takes, and only God can create and by infusing that human soul into the subject matter, the human being, and that's why, because you're creating a spiritual principle, it directly takes God, because the human mother and father are not contributing a spiritual being. They've got their own spiritual soul, but they can't make another one. Only God can do that. So at the point of conception, God must create the human soul, which then determinately activates that embryo which is forming to be human. And that's why I say, going back to Adam and Eve, whether you have explanation from the slime of the earth or from the point of conception, or whether you have a transmutation of adult animals, I'm not trying to get into the science, but whatever way you do it, it is a radical transformation which is quasi-creative. It could only be done by God to produce that human soul. And the thing that people don't realize, you're not just talking about you got an animal sitting there or an embryo and you stick in a soul. No. The moment of the beginning of that human life is a radical transformation, an instantaneous transformation of all that belongs to that organism. It is truly a creative act. Joe?
Isn't that what the scientists are affirming when many of them use the term procreation rather than creation?
I think what they're referring to there is simply that the mother and father are creating. We're not creating ex nihilo, but we're starting from the seeds of life that are donated by the parents.
So when that donation happens, we have a cell.
Well, yes, when the sperm and the ovum are united, you get that first living cell.
But at that very moment, it has its form as well. The form is already determining the humanity.
That's right. The formation of that first living cell is the expression and presence of
Can't be
the form
anything
and
else. It's not
matter.
gonna be an octopus or.
Nope. You don't give birth to rabbits. I mean, we have lived in a state of ignorance for a long time, and even in the last century, for a long time, people were trying to say, well, it's just a blob, which is not that far from the original Aristotelian conception at the beginning. But we now know better.
Do you think most people look at that and say that cell is matter?
Well, I don't know what most people say. Most people say all kinds of funny things, and admittedly
I'm sorry, I'm among them.
we're trying to be a little more specific. That's why somebody said Thomism is simply sophisticated common sense. If it sounds like it's not common sense at all, you're in trouble. But admittedly, it is a sophisticated way of understanding it. Okay, let's go on to the next point. Number 16, this rational soul is united to the body in such manner that it is the only substantial form of the body. By virtue of his soul, a man is a man, an animal, a living thing, a body, a substance, and a being. All those things. Therefore, the soul gives man every essential degree of perfection. Moreover, it gives the body a share in the act of being whereby it itself exists. Now, what does all that mean? The key insight or the key problem that's being addressed there is as you move up the degrees of living, going from the non-living to the vegetative, from the vegetative to the sentient, and then from the sentient to the rational, one asks, well, how do these fit together? If we've got a human being that's got rationality and sensation and nutrition and is a substance, how do you know it's really just one form for all that? Maybe you got a form for one thing, for the substance, and a form for the vegetative powers, and a form for the animal powers, and a form for the human powers. Maybe you got a bunch of different forms there.
I just heard somebody say that that kind of movement, I don't know if it was on TV on one of those National Geographic or whatever, or PBS, but that's what they suggested. That as you look into, somebody was judging Amy. She's pregnant, okay, and she goes to the doctor, and that's what he says. He divides it up into the animal and then the sensate. He said, look, this is the animal state right now, and then it's going to move into the other. So that's incorrect.
Well, no, it depends on what he would say when you get to the human state. The question is it one being in which the same form, the same soul, is doing all these things, even the lower operations? That's what's really at issue here.
So that wouldn't be incorrect if somebody heard that.
Because if you go from one state to the next, well, of
Yeah,
course,
I think
that's successive animation.
Okay.
See, that we already dealt with. But the real issue at this point is, do you have a different soul for every different level of your operations? And the really simple, basic answer is to remember that the soul is a principle of unity. And you have, therefore, as many beings as you have souls. So if you said that you got a different soul for your vegetative being and your animal being and your rational being, that would mean you're three different beings somehow glued together. And that denies the existential unity of organisms at every level. Everything is one, that's why it's one substance, because it's one being, it's got one principle of activity, which is the soul. Moreover, we note that in our own experience, rationality is distinguished from sensation because of the objects that are known. And by rationality, I understand the world, I judge the world, I make will acts about the world, but at the same time I am experiencing the world in a sensory way. It is the same me, it's the same you that is having this multifold experience. You have your foot, so to speak, in all of these worlds. You are the same being that is experiencing your nutrition as you eat a steak dinner, and the same being that is experiencing the pleasure of the taste of the steak, and the same being that's understanding the nature of the steak of coming from a cow. At the rational level. All of this, the arguments that point to the existential unity of the human being also tell you that you don't have different souls operating at different levels. You're one being. The other problem that arises here that you got to keep your eye out for is Cartesianism. Because be careful, you could also have the idea that, here you got an animal body and it's going along just fine, and then you stick a soul in it, paste it in at the pineal gland, which was what Descartes basically did. And you're not really one being, you're two beings. So you wind up being kind of a soul operating a perfect machine, a robot. That again denies the existential unity of man. And look at the plethora of historical errors that were introduced in the history of philosophy by Descartes because he did that. Like Humpty Dumpty, we split our existential being into parts that could never be reglued. And they couldn't be reglued because you'd made them different parts. When they're not different parts, they are existential co-principles of one being. Because even in us, form and matter constitute one substance, one living substance that is capable of all kinds of operations, and those operations are attributable to the soul. The soul is the principle of operation. And it is one principle of operation, or it's one soul, that accounts for all the operations we engage in as a human being, and which we are subjectively quite aware of. It is I who think and talk and speak and hear and taste and feel and live and breathe. It is I that do it, not a bunch of me's. Otherwise, we wouldn't be one person, we'd be a committee.
And who's responsible?
No one. If you're a committee, nobody's responsible. Descartes practically does that, though. It's like, all the rest of the committees down there at the organic material level, and we've got the head of the committee, the soul is up somehow hanging around the top. Understand it's not that easy to avoid that mistake. A dear friend of mine who was a biochemist, I remember discussing this with him at one time, and his view was basically Cartesian. I would have thought he would not have held that, given everything else I knew about him, but he just thought, God just kind of adds the soul. But think of the problems that you have when you say that. You're into Descartes in spades. And all of the questions that gives rise to. But that's why it is critical to understand that at the moment of conception, the human soul disposes the body to the matter to its ultimate disposition, not the penultimate. That could be beforehand. That's almost the ultimate, saipe ultimus. But it's the ultimate disposition, the last disposition, which is the first moment of the new being. And that last disposition can only be explained by the infusion. See, the word infusion is misleading, isn't it? Because when you think of an infusion, you think you got something already there and you're putting it in. And that's horribly Cartesian. That's why you got to watch your language. We're talking about the infusion of the soul, but it's really the creation of the soul simultaneously determining to the least possible minutiae the existential disposition of the matter. We don't have words that properly describe this because our words are always drawn from the physical world, and that's why we always talk in terms of approximations Our words get closer and closer to the reality, but they never touch the reality itself. Just as no scientific instrument can ever quite get a hold of the reality that it measures. That's why you don't have a proper concept of what it is to be, what you are at a given moment. We always abstract. You say, I'm the same person I was 10 minutes ago. Well, not exactly, are you? But if you were to try to ask, well, how do I explain the unique existential distinction between myself and 10 minutes ago? There's no capability the human mind or human instrumentation has to attain that. We know that it exists. So, it's like you ask, what is the disposition of my matter at this moment? We know there is a disposition which is unique and absolutely determinate, but there's no way that a human mind can know what that is. The only being that can know what it is God who is creating it at this moment, who has infinite knowledge of all things, even of the least determination of every creature. So we know that it can be known, and we know that it is known by the infinite mind of God, but it is never known to the limited mind of man. Now let's make sure we got 16 complete here. This rational soul is united to the body in such manner that it is the only substantial form of the body. Oh wait, we've done that. By virtue of his soul, a man is a man. Also, he's an animal. Also, he's a living thing. Also, he's a body. Also, he's a substance. And also, he's a being. All those things are determined by the actual presence of your soul. Therefore, the soul gives man every essential degree of perfection at one and the same time. Determines us to be all of those various levels of being. Moreover, it gives to the body a share in the act of being whereby it itself exists. That's one of those little reflexive ways of saying things. The soul itself, remember, is in the essential order and receives existence, doesn't it? Because it's a creature. So by receiving its existence, it is then enabled to share that existence with the matter which determines the whole as what we call the body. Note the ambiguity we have in that word body, because we talk sometimes about the soul and the body like they're two different things. Whereas when you say soul and body, it really means soul and matter, form and matter, where they're not really two different things, but they're one thing composed of diverse principles. But sometimes we also talk about my body, and we're thinking about the whole thing, which is a substance. So in one respect, the body isn't a substance, but it's a principle of the substance, which is the body, which is a substance. Did I go too fast? So when you talk about form and matter, that correlates to soul and body. But when you use the word body there, you mean the primary matter, don't you? Because you're opposing it to the soul. The primary matter isn't something you can see. Now, when you get the soul and the matter together, you've got a body, which is the whole substance, the whole corporeal substance that you can see. So body in one case you can't see, and body in the other case you can see. Just to make it clear that they're different. You can't see the body, which is the prime matter that we relate to the soul when we say body and soul. But you can see the body that is the product of the union of the body and the soul. Sometimes we use body to mean just the primary matter. Sometimes we use it to mean the secondary matter, which has sensible accidents that you can observe. Anything else on 16?
We understand it.
That's it.
I never know what it is myself till I go back and start working through the text. And even then, I'm not always, you think I automatically know this stuff. No, I don't.
On that last part, it gives the body a share in the act of being. whereby it itself exists. Here it seems that it's implicitly denying that matter is bad, like the Manichees, sort of.
Yeah, we don't want to say matter's bad.
Right.
If you're a material being, it's wonderful to be material. If you're a carrot, because you're a carrot, I can chew you up. But on the other hand, it's very good that you are a carrot because there's nothing else you can be.
Right. So nirvana would be implicitly denied here. You can't reach that union of your soul and
Well, you certainly don't.
separation from your body.
You don't really want separation from your body because your soul is naturally ordered to and perfected by being in a body.
Okay.
Human beings are bodily beings. It's good to have a body. And that's a natural argument for the resurrection. Yeah, it's not it's wonderful that when you die, your soul doesn't cease to be and you continue to exist and so forth. But it would be even more wonderful if you could do all that and have your body back. And since with God no natural desire can be in vain, you can argue that, it seems to me, that a resurrection is necessary, not just an option. It's necessary, for better or for worse. But we won't go there. Number 17. Anything else on 16? I don't know how far we'll go.
Now we can start 17.
Okay, not ready to handle 17 today? We got another 5 minutes with that. We started 5 minutes late. I mean, to look all the distance you drove, sister, you don't want to.
Yes, we have to get our money's worth.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a form here.
Given the price of
in this
gas today.
envelope that we want you to discuss. Because if the form.
Does it matter?
Yeah, right. If the form goes away, there's no matter left. Right? Michael, would you ask him to explain it?
You'll have to
Yeah,
correct it in form.
thank you.
Yeah. Let's see what you people have to.
I don't
Oh,
know.
It's things from the
Come on,
past.
okay. I'll
we need an explanation.
open it.
Yeah, the envelope, please.
Oh, Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Oh, she's here too, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you people. Is this real? It looks like it's fake.
That's what I asked you.
Yeah.
Is that
It
a
has form,
form?
it has matter.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'll put that on my wall and leave it there.
Oh, that's no.
So when you go someplace with that thing, what happens? Does it lose its matter?
Well, one thing, because of inflation, it keeps getting smaller every second you're looking at it.
We apologize.
But
I'm
no.
sorry the rest of the people aren't here
Oh, well, I
to
thank
say
you.
thank you.
Well, I thank you all very much. I really, I don't need to have you do this. But
Well, it's-
Have you seen the new one yet?
that's what this is.
Yeah, have you seen it yet?
The-
You've seen it.
Well, you've seen it now.
Yeah.
You've seen it before.
I think I had seen them,
Is
yes.
that a new one?
That's-
Yeah, it's
I
brand
got it
new.
at the
It's
bank.
brand new. It looks fake to me, but
That's fake.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of
you,
Well,
you
they got
guarantee.
3 of them floating around.
You guarantee that when I pass it, I won't go to jail?
No.
All right, well, thank you very much to everybody. That's very nice of you.
Isn't that better than 17?
Okay, yeah, you got me there. All right, thank you very much. We'll terminate it tonight.
Sound production copyright Olteen Library Services, all rights reserved. www.aquinasphilosophy.com